Hi everyone and welcome to Exploring the Build. If you've just found this place, then welcome. And if you're returning, I am glad to have you back. I'm Alex and this is my channel where we explore and theory craft different character builds for Dungeons & Dragons. Today we're doing one of our quick builds where we'll be exploring a briefly summarized character build for D&D. As always with our quick builds, if there's ever a build you'd like to see me explore in the future, be sure to let me know in the comments below. The concept for today's video comes from Vortigern7021. Vortigern requested a Ranger Longbow build in order to see exactly how this classic archetype of a Ranger with a longbow stacks up in 2024, given that 2024 has seen a bit of a nerf to both ranged weapons and ranged combat as a whole, but also the Ranger class. So today we are doing the Ranger Longbow. The Ranger with a longbow. A longbow optimized in the hands of a Ranger. The Ranger built specifically to use a longbow. That Ranger build. In all seriousness, this is actually going to be a very straightforward build. We're using 2024 rules in order to see exactly how this classic archetype stands up as a build. We're also going to be single classing, no multi-classing, since we want to see what the Ranger specifically has to offer. The one last thing to say is that even though we are building a Ranger who is trying to have a favored weapon in the longbow, I don't really want damage to be the sole purpose of this build. Yes, we will pick up some damage since we are trying to specialize into a specific type of weapon. That's not the be-all end-all for us. We also want to pick up some flavorful or utility-based mechanics that can help us fulfill the explorer or scout role, since that kind of goes hand in hand with what the concept of a Ranger with a longbow wants to be. We're not an archer with a longbow building for damage, we're trying to build the Ranger with a longbow and make that classic archetype come to life in 2024. Other than that, let's jump into the build. Starting in character creation with our origin, anything can work because anything should be able to work with a Ranger longbow. We're not building for any one specific species. Obviously, a classic idea would probably be an elf, but honestly, it's up to you what you pick. For the sake of this video, I will say we're a human just because I'm very vanilla and I like the second origin feat that you get by picking human. But beyond that, the world is your oyster. As far as backgrounds go, we're going to go back to 2014 and pick up the Outlander from the player's handbook. That way we can customize our ability scores as well as pick the origin feat of our choice. Honestly, any origin feat can kind of work, and there are a few backgrounds in the 2024 player's handbook that do boost dexterity and constitution, which are the two things we want to boost. So honestly, you could go with those as well, but for the sake of this, I will say we're picking Outlander because thematically, it also feels very appropriate. As far as our origin feats goes, there are quite a few options that can work. As I said, pretty much any origin feat is fair game. The ones that might be really good to look out for, though, are Alert for extra initiative. Savage Attacker is also kinda nice, given that it's one of the main origin feats that allow us to actually increase our damage with a specific weapon, so that could be helpful. Tough is always good since you just get extra health. And finally, Magic Initiate Wizard is a good option to name given that we could get Mage Armor as well as a couple cantrips. Mage Armor at level 1 is the equivalent of +1 studded leather armor, so as far as AC goes, it would be our best bet. You can pick your favorites from these, and for our human origin feat, I will say that's exactly what we do, so it really doesn't matter too much. But for our background feat, I'm going to pick Crafter. Crafter mechanically has a few bonuses, and it's mainly more of like a long-term campaign feat, given that you get the discount on non-magical items and materials, as well as the actual crafting bonuses. But I like it not because it's mechanically powerful, but because it is very flavorful for this character. The classic idea of that Ranger, Wilderness, Wanderer, and Explorer is probably someone who is good with tools or making things on the fly and being self-sufficient. Crafter is perfect for that. So I'll say with our background, we definitely pick that up. Finally, for our stats, we want the following array of ability scores: 13 strength, 17 dexterity, 14 constitution, 8 intelligence, 14 wisdom, and 9 charisma. Looking at the level breakdown of the build now, honestly, this is gonna go pretty quick. There are some things that I will want to talk about in terms of like a main combo in combat that we would want to do, or some specific choices and why we pick them. But really, since we're a straight class, we're just getting whatever the ranger gets. So, looking at tier 1, levels 1 to 5, we're going to get quite a few things pretty quickly. We gain weapon mastery for our longbow, as well as favored enemy, which has been revamped to focus around Hunter's Mark. I'll talk about that a little bit later. Level 2, we gain Deft Explorer, one of our first exploration or utility-based features. This gives us some extra languages as well as expertise. We're going to get more expertise than we ever did back in 2014, and that is really nice. We also gain a fighting style, so of course we'll pick archery. For our subclass, we have a lot of few options to pick here at level 3, but honestly, I'm going to go with Horizon Walker of all things. Horizon Walker kind of does exactly what we want it to do. It gives us a little boost to our damage from Planar Warrior, which, as long as we have the bonus action available, can be used in tandem with something like Hunter's Mark, which is pretty nice. But also, it gives us extra exploration features / flavor, given that it's right there in the name. We are a Horizon Walker. We're an explorer or wanderer who is meant to travel the entire world, protecting the material plane from external threats. Level 4 is where we get our first feat, and here we're going to pick up Great Weapon Master because it is now the feat that can buff longbow damage. A longbow is a heavy weapon. Great Weapon Master boosts all heavy weapon damage when we're attacking with the attack action. So that's going to be our go-to, given that Sharpshooter no longer has the -5 and +10 for damage. This version of Great Weapon Master is still going to put in work though. The other thing to mention about Great Weapon Master is that it is actually a really good skirmisher feat. The reason is the second part of it that allows us to make an extra attack as part of our bonus action just requires us to land a critical hit or drop an enemy to 0 with a melee weapon. We can make another attack with the same weapon as part of a bonus action. This won't happen often, especially since we're trying to focus on using the longbow, but should an enemy get into our face, we have the option to swap to a melee weapon instead, maybe a favored short sword, rapier, scimitar, you name it, and then attack with that weapon, and if we drop them to 0 or get a critical hit, then we could potentially line up another attack. It's not something we're building for, it's just a nice little cherry on top. The final thing we get from tier 1 is of course extra attack, and extra attack is honestly pretty good if we're just focusing single target damage for right now, since we could have a d6 on all those attacks if we have Hunter's Mark up. If we also had our bonus action available, we get an extra d8 on one of the attacks from Planar Warrior, and we can add Great Weapon Master to both of those attacks that we make as part of our attack action. Tier 2, we're going to continue to get a fair amount of nice things. We get Roving for an extra little speed boost and extra speeds in general, so that helps us become more of an actual explorer or scout. For our next feat, we're going to take Sharpshooter to actually finally round off our dexterity to 18, and Sharpshooter is still good even though it doesn't give the -5 and +10 damage. It just focuses more on actually being an accurate shot as opposed to a power shot. We're able to shoot in melee, we're able to shoot at extended range, and we're able to ignore cover. Level 7, we get Ethereal Step from Horizon Walker. It's not too important, but it is a nice little get out of jail free card. If an enemy got into melee with us, we don't want to melee them back, so instead we use our bonus action to do Ethereal Step, get away, and then appear back on the material plane at the end of our turn. Level 9, we're going to gain 2 nice features. We gain access to the Haste spell from the Horizon Walker's expanded spell list, and we gain actual expertise. So we now have 3 skills total that we have expertise in just from being a ranger. Haste, on the other hand, is going to be a pretty vital component for us, especially since it is a very powerful concentration spell for a martial character. The issue that starts to appear is the conflict with Hunter's Mark. Because they're both concentration, we have to pick which one we're using. For right now, I'll say Haste is our big fight spell, and Hunter's Mark is more of our go-to little fight spell, but we'll talk about why that is a conflict a little bit more in the summary. Tier 3, we're going to gain a couple things, so I'm just going to go through them pretty quick, and then I'll come back and talk about what's important. We're going to gain Distant Strike at level 11 from being a Horizon Walker. We're going to gain our next feat, which is probably just an ability score improvement to increase our dexterity by 2 and cap it off at 20. We're going to gain Relentless Hunter, the first feature that actually explicitly boosts Hunter's Mark and nothing else. And then finally Nature's Veil, as well as Spectral Defense. Okay, back to Distant Strike. Honestly, until now, we've been a pretty solid single target damage dealer, given that we have Great Weapon Master with our longbow. We could use Hunter's Mark, or we could use haste for just an extra action. All that stuff really does add up, assuming we're actually landing our shots against those enemies. Distance strike is where our playstyle can potentially change, and we don't have to be locked into single target damage if we don't want to. Yes, single target damage is key because action economy and all that. However, it's kind of nice for us to have the option to attack multiple enemies. Distance strike says that if we use our attack action to attack 2 separate enemies, we can then make an extra attack against a third. We can also teleport 10 feet in between each of these attacks, which is just kind of fun. But getting that third attack off is pretty nice, since that third attack is part of the attack action, meaning it still applies Great Weapon Master. With haste, that can be a 4th attack, though haste doesn't have to be against a 4th enemy. It could also be against one of the 3 enemies we've already hit. Now, the reason I'm talking about attacking possibly up to 4 enemies at once, or at least 3 enemies, is because of the value we get from wielding our longbow and attacking multiple enemies. Not only are we getting an extra use of Great Weapon Master out of attacking a 3rd enemy, we're also getting the slow weapon mastery to apply. Until now, if we've been hitting one single target with our attacks to just deal as much damage as possible, we've been applying the slow mastery once to that enemy, so they're only getting their speed reduced by 10 feet. As soon as we start splitting the tree though, not only are we technically getting more damage because of more uses of Great Weapon Master, we're also getting more uses of the slow mastery, debuffing multiple enemies at once instead of just one enemy. As I said, action economy and all that, single target damage is technically better if we can put an enemy down, but assuming we're with an actual party of other players who are also able to deal at least a relative amount of damage, or even AoE damage, it's probably not the worst idea in the world for us to switch to more of a controller. We're not adding a bunch of control on top of what we're trying to do, but rather we're trying to hit a bunch of enemies, deal a little bit of damage so they get closer to being able to be put down by a wizard's fireball or a fighter's multitude of attacks. And while we're trying to tickle those enemies with a little bit of damage each, we're also applying the slow mastery, making it harder for them to either get into combat or get away from combat with us. Finally, in tier 4, we're going to get a few more things. We get our last regular feat, we get an epic boon, and then we get 3 features: Ice Hunter, Feral Senses, and Foe Slayer. First of all, for our regular feat, we probably just take another ability score improvement and increase either our wisdom or constitution by +2 to get them to 16, given that we haven't really improved either of those too much. And then for our epic boon, you can pick any epic boon you like, as long as it's increasing our dexterity and doing something that you find mechanically powerful or fun, then that's kind of all that matters. Now, real quick, the other features. Precise Hunter and Foe Slayer are again features that apply specifically to Hunter's Mark to boost it. And here's where the issue of the 2024 Ranger can be seen in full. We have another concentration spell that we really like to use, and that is Haste. Of course, there might even be more concentration spells you like. If you love things like Fog Cloud, Entangle, Spike Growth, or Summon Beast, or anything else that the Ranger gets, you aren't going to be able to get the full value out of Hunter's Mark, and that is something we should be aware of. We gain advantage on all of our attacks against enemies with Hunter's Mark up, and our Hunter's Mark is a D10 instead of a D6. That's not terrible. It's just that we wouldn't be able to use other concentration spells and get the bonuses that we would out of them. Likewise, if we do use those other concentration spells, such as our big haste spell, we don't get 3 of our core ranger features. Now, in all honesty, I'm not too worried about it, just because, like I said, I would think we're using our big spell slots for haste for those big fights, and then we have our lower level spell slots as well as the free castings of Hunter's Mark to bamf up on the smaller fights where we don't want to waste those bigger resources. Even if we're not using them for haste, we can still save them by using these other resources. The issue is that it is a bit of a design flaw, given that we're having to choose between the core features we get as a ranger or these other spells that can let us do some pretty cool things. And besides that, that's the build. Overall, we are a ranger with a longbow, because that's kind of all we needed to do was just pick ranger, grab a longbow, we've got the build done. But in all seriousness, picking up the choices we did has allowed us to specialize a little bit more into the longbow. Horizon Walker allows us to get some more value out of both the Great Weapon Master feat as well as the slow weapon mastery, given that we are getting more attacks with our attack action, and we're incentivized eventually with Distant Strike to attack separate enemies. We don't have to though, we do have options. We can stick to single target damage, don't feel we're locked into any one specific playstyle. Looking at the vibes per round of this character, combat, we've got some pretty good vibes. Each round and in each combat, we'll be able to make an interesting choice. Single target damage, multi-target damage. Do we want to apply slow a bunch of times, or do we just want to get rid of one specific enemy? We're not locked into one specific playstyle where we just aim for a guy, call sharpshooter, and try to get advantage in order to deal as much damage as possible. Out of combat, we have skills, expertise to back up those skills, as well as a few other nice features such as roving, nature's veil, etc., that all allow us to feel like an explorer or utility-based character. We don't have favored terrain or favored enemy like a 2014 Ranger did, but at the same point in time, we have features that are going to be always on. In 2014, if you knew you were going to be in a campaign that focused on a specific terrain, you could make it so that you always had that terrain available. If you were in a more terrain agnostic campaign though, you'd be picking favored terrains that may or may not appear, and if you were in those terrains, you didn't have that feature, so it could feel bad from time to time. Here though, that's not the case. We will always have access to our features, except Hunter's Mark. That's the one caveat. Like I said, depending on how much you like various concentration spells, whether that's haste or something completely different, because you don't have to use haste if you don't want to, you will have to eventually make the choice of, do you want to use Hunter's Mark and gain some bonuses for it, or do you want to use this other cool concentration spell that you like and you found a nice combo for? The one nice thing, this choice doesn't really show up until later on in the higher levels, but it still does show up, and that is the unfortunate part of the Ranger's design. Besides that though, that's the build. Let me know what you thought of it, or what you would add or change to get closer to the concept of the Longbow Ranger. Would you keep Horizon Walker, or would you go off into a different subclass? Because I'm sure there's going to be a lot of people who would rather pick up other subclasses that have different benefits. Overall, I'm pretty happy with the Horizon Walker, given that it was able to boost both our exploration and more theme side of the build, as well as the mechanical damage side, but it obviously might not be everyone's cup of tea. Either way, thank you so much for coming on the journey with me, and I hope to see you in the next one.